Okay, so one of my calls, I mean, I don't think I'm getting these right, but you just got to give it a go, shoot your shot. Closures. So part of 3.10, so I did a video earlier on types of cost and how you could build those into a decision-making essay generally. But closures hasn't come up that often. It's quite topical. Lots of businesses stopping selling certain products, closing stores, closing factories. So it could fit in, but there's no rhyme or reason. But anyway, if you're talking about closures essay, you are talking about closing a factory, discontinuing a product, closing a store, whatever it might be. Before you start any essay, you should be thinking about what calculations can I make which will support my analysis. And so closures, there are some general ones which you've got to think about. There might be some other ones within the nature of the question, but you've got to think about total contribution. This isn't about contribution per unit if you're talking about discontinuing a product or a factory, because you're looking at the overall financial impact of that department. What are we going to lose if we close that department? So the contribution is really important, and you should be looking at it whether it's over a number of years. They give you like previous years and you can work out total contribution, or just for one, how much contribution does that department make? So the revenue minus any variable costs of production. Then you work out the profit or loss of the department. Sometimes they give you that because it's not the worst calculation. It's a pretty quick one. Sometimes you'll have to work it through, or they'll say we're going to close the loss-making department, so you work out which one is the loss-making department. But if you're going to work out the profit or loss of the department, you do your total contribution less your fixed overheads. And then they might have forecasts of future losses or just generally how much profit or loss they've made over a period of years. So then you've got those as focal points for your analysis. I think the key thing is they're not given, they're not going to carry on. So you think about trends, like what could change them, and also any limitations of those figures. One of those limitations is fixed costs. So fixed costs as a whole is a calculation. It's just what will happen to those fixed costs if we decide to close that department. If the fixed costs stay, then they're got to be covered by the other departments. So we've got to almost disregard them. They're not relevant to this decision making essay. We've got to talk about why. We don't just ignore it because we're demonstrating to the examiner we know this. But those fixed costs will have to be covered by the other departments. So our debate then is, can we gain a contribution on another product? And hypothetically, maybe we can. And there might be something in the question that says, oh, we will shift production to this product which makes more profit. And that's cool. And then you can discuss that. But fixed costs do not change in line with output. That's the theory we've got to use, and then we question it and say, would there be any savings? And so obviously fixed costs can include rent. If you're all building in the same factory, that rent's still going to exist. It's going to include supervisors. Are we going to make a supervisor redundant? And then we start thinking about the costs of that as well. So those relevant costs on the fixed costs is what you've got to think about, and any potential savings. Now, normally these would be in fixed costs, but just think about it within the context of what you're writing. Is there anything in there? Oh, they could save that if they stop selling this. They could save that if they close the factory. So just some calculations there. If we've got a fixed cost saving, then obviously we would not lose all of the contribution because we would gain the saving in the fixed cost. So if for argument's sake we're losing £1.2 million worth of contribution, but we would save £200,000 worth of fixed cost by closing this department, you could say hypothetically we would only lose £1 million. So just think about the impact on profit. But then we obviously question it, like I say, can we make up that contribution? What impact would that have in other areas, etc.? But from a calculation point of view, you have to look at total contribution. We have to look at profit loss and department. Sometimes the fixed costs and savings are all little vague limitation ones, which help you to demonstrate your ability to synthesize and explain what could affect your decision. Because effectively what we're saying is close or not close. Basic, but that is what we're saying, and then we build from there. Okay, so these are the wider factors that you should be considering when you're writing a closures essay. You're not going to be able to write about all 6 of these potentially, or maybe you can, but you've got to be careful, get the key areas. Some of these won't apply, and just try and consider what would affect your decision as to whether to close or not. Don't move in a different direction. Oh, suddenly we're going to start selling another product. This is going to make us millions. That may be the case, but if you move too far in another direction, you're missing the point of the question. The question is just, should we close it or shouldn't we close it? Don't muddy the waters. And so we look at these, and I'm going to try and highlight them as I go. So the key bits. So we've got fixed overheads. If you are looking at a closures essay a paragraph should be on fixed overheads. It's such a massive part of your decision. And one part of it is how have those fixed overheads been shared? So there was a question, I think it was an AS question on bicycles and closures and children's bikes, where they charge the children's bike range for the sponsorship of an adult team. Now they also made adult bikes. I'm like, is that fair? Is that really fair? Would they, and is that contributing to them making a loss? Would they not be making a loss if they weren't contributing towards this cost, which isn't relevant to their department? Something to consider. Also, we've got to think about other methods of sharing overheads. So if you're looking at overhead absorption, we look at allocation. So allocation is where an overhead just relates to one department, so they should be charged it. So that cycling example, I would argue that the sponsorship should have been allocated to the adult team because it benefits the adult bike because it benefits them as it's an adult team rather than children's bikes. You can debate that and you can question that, and that's fine. But that would be what I'd argue. And then you've got apportionment. So if you had like rent, how would you share rent between the departments? We usually would argue that it's floor area because that's the most logical. So the product that or department takes up the most floor space should be charged more than the others. It could be machine hours for the maintenance on the particular machinery that they own for production, whatever it might be. But we've got to find a fair way. And so if there's anything in the question which that isn't particularly fair, then we question it and say how that could influence your decision. Because if the overheads were lower on the department which is potentially going to be closed, that could contribute towards making a profit and therefore would clearly impact your decision. We've also got to think about will they change? Like we said in the previous slide, will the fixed cost change if we close? That's got to be part of your thought process. If it does, then that would impact your decision. If the fixed costs don't, then the other departments have got to cover all of those fixed costs. That could lead to an overall reduction in profitability if we cannot cover as much contribution as this department that's closing generates. And so we also got to look at what those overheads are. So if we had an understanding as to what the overheads are, we can then understand whether they could be saved or what impact they could have with closures. So there's a lot of discussions around fixed overheads, and you should be able to get a good meaty paragraph out of it. Other products is a good factor. This is more of a non-financial factor, which does have a financial impact. Does this particular product, does this department complement other items in the range? Now, if it does, then what we've got is that we could have a reduction in revenue or reduction in profitability in another area because we close this department. Now, clearly that's not desirable. That's not what we need. And so we've got to think about as a business overall financial impact. And you probably won't have that data, so it's definitely a limitation, but you might have it inferred. Sometimes that is a product which has accessories, so clearly those accessories wouldn't sell anymore, so we would have to factor in the loss contribution, loss profitability of those products as well as the product that we're closing. We also got to think other impacts within the business and how customers would feel if we stopped selling a particular product. Just because it's not making a profit, there was potentially still a customer base that would be disappointed if we stopped selling. So other products is a big area. We've also got to factor in closures should be a last resort. Now, there's lots of examples. If you read the financial presses or whatever, if you study business, there's lots of examples of businesses closing, stopping selling products. And generally speaking, I would argue that businesses do not want to close a department. You can argue that with me if you wish, but I don't think they do because they help to contribute to profit. So what we could be thinking about in our closures essay is other methods that they could use to help keep that department open. So essentially, how could they improve profit? Well, there's only two ways you can improve profit really at the most basic level. That's increase the amount of money coming in or decrease the money going out. So first question should be around pricing strategies. Is our product potentially underpriced? So sometimes in a scenario in that bike one, it was like, oh, they hadn't changed the price for years. It's good quality, good reputation. Well, there is an argument there that you can increase the price. And then you start talking about, oh, they can make higher profit margins. This can increase profit. But we question it because how much does price factor into customers' decision making? Could they lose out to competition? What are the competitors' pricing? Is it possible? So price is important. Lots of economists will want to build in price elasticity here and say, oh, the impact of price of demand, which is fine as a principle, but try and make it more accounting language. Don't just throw in it economics terms. The examiner may not be happy with them, and you've got to explain what you're saying. So we more just say if they increase the price, how much is price a significant factor in our customers' purchasing decision and what that could do. Pricing clearly could be there. And then we've got costs. like we've said, one thing we can do is increase prices. Could we find a method of decreasing costs and keeping this department open? So sometimes that could be something in the question which is clear that there is an impact on costs of producing the items. So we could bulk buy more if we work with other departments on common materials. That has come up. It could be that we are buying materials from a supplier who's too expensive. We might not know this, but we could question that. But equally, sometimes in the question it says, oh, exchange rates have driven prices up. So you could argue that exchange rates could change and come down, but equally that could also have a negative impact. I'm talking a lot about keeping the place open, but sometimes it could be cost could increase further, and if that's the case, that's further ammunition for your argument that we should close that department. I'm definitely not proposing your conclusion is don't close. I'm just proposing that you need to be balanced, and most people just go, oh, the finance says they're making a loss, so we should close it. It's not that simple, and as accountants, we need to be able to pitch that to people. This isn't just about an exam. If you're looking to work in accounts, can you explain this to someone what the impacts could be? Non-financially, you have to think about staffing. If you're going to close a department, stop a product, whatever it might be, this is clearly going to have an impact on staff. And the likelihood is there's going to be redundancies. And if we're talking about redundancies, we've got to talk about the short-term one-off financial impact of that, because there is a cost involved. You have to pay staff off. What's the liquidity position of this business? Could they afford that redundancy? What impact could that have on them? But clearly the non-financial impact on the morale of the staff and the motivation of the staff when people around them are losing their jobs, likelihood is people are going to be looking for a job elsewhere, or they're not going to be working as hard because they feel so unsettled. This is an impact that you should consider. Apologies. Another thing, is it permanent or is it closure? Is it a temporary closure? So if it's permanent, it's potentially going to be more expensive because you can be selling off sites, but we might be able to sell off assets. If it's temporary, we might have some ongoing running costs of this that we've got to keep on running the site, but it means we can go back. But closure generally in these questions is a permanent closure. And so what you've got to be weighing up is financially, non-financially, what's the right decision for the business? There's no right answer, but you've got to think about a wide range of points. And all of these, there's loads here. They'll all be relevant, all their limitations if you've not been told them. So if you can consider all of these, even 4 paragraphs of these, with the financials, the figures have to be embedded. The figures can't be separate. There can't be a list of calculations at the front. You kind of go, oh, look, I've done my numbers. That's it. Now I'll get on. The numbers have to be embedded, especially if you want to be hitting level 4. And the level 5s is really difficult to do, but wide-ranging evidence, bringing in the wider context, a lot of things we've discussed about with limitations here on these points, that's what gets you there. But make a clear judgment at the end. Closure, not closure. What's the key evidence that supports your choice? Why is it you've come to that conclusion? Why is that better than the strengths of the alternatives? That's not about arguing the alternatives better again, because that's going to get messy. And any limitations. What else would you like to have known in order to make this decision? And this could be anything on these 6 points here, or this could be other financial points. Don't just be, oh, I'd like to know no accounts from the past. It's just boring. Yes, it might be relevant, but if that's your only limitation, it's not really that insightful. There's lots of things you could be talking about. And if you are going to use that point, really explain why historic data can help you. Because let's be honest, if we're closing a department, we're more worried about the future and what the future direction of this business will be without this department, or with it if we decide to keep it. Okay, good luck.